Okay, I think we'll make a start if everyone else is happy with that. My name is Marianne Jumpen. I'm the archivist and library manager at the Marx Memorial Library, which you can see in my background. I'm really delighted to welcome you to this evening's panel discussion on the very important subject of anti-imperialism and education, marking this International Week of Anti-Imperialist Struggle. We've got a fantastic panel of speakers here this evening, and this subject is particularly close to our heart here at the Marx Memorial Library. We've got some phenomenal collections on the struggle against imperialism spanning the 20th century, and we really hope that this event really kickstarts some of our educational work around our collections on this very important subject. Just a tiny bit of housekeeping. You'll see your mics and your cameras are all switched off at the moment, but please do feed in any questions you have for our panel into the chat, because we've got a Marx Memorial Library person there waiting for your questions to feed them through the chair. And we'll be recording this evening's event, so we're putting that up on our website along with all our other events, so you can have another look and share it with everybody. I think that's probably enough from me. Marge, shall I hand over to you?
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you everybody, and thank you Miriam, and a very warm welcome to this meeting. It's an absolute pleasure and privilege to chair this discussion on anti-imperialism and education. We're actually going to start with a short message from Jeremy Corbyn that Miriam's going to play for us. And then I'll introduce our three speakers. We'll take the three speakers together, and then there'll be time for questions and discussion when they've spoken, and they'll have a chance to come back before the end of the meeting. Okay, so welcome everybody again. And over you to Miriam, please, to play us this introductory clip.
My greetings to Liberation and the Marx Memorial Library for this wonderful event you're doing as part of Anti-Imperialism Week. I think it's very important we have these events, and very important we understand the history of colonial struggles, the way in which the people of India freed themselves from British colonial domination, and the brutality with which that occupation took place, the massacres that took place against Sikh and other people in India. But there were also massacres and abuses all around the world. Unless we understand our history and where we're coming from, we won't be able to build those good, solid relations for the future. And so this event this evening is a very, very important one, because it gives everyone the chance to discuss the kind of world we want to live in and build on the brave struggles that people made in colonies all over the world and suffered grievously. I mentioned India. I could also mention Malaya. I could also mention Kenya and the way in which the Mau Mau people were treated. And I could also, and do, mention the brutality and the murder of the slave trade and the way it took people from West Africa to the Caribbean and the Americas in order to exploit them for colonial profit. Understand our past, and that way we can shape our own future.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And that's some fantastic introduction to our first speaker, who is Harsiv Bains. He's speaking to tell us about liberation, but Harsiv is also a trustee at the Marx Memorial Library and our treasurer. So a very warm welcome to you, Harsiv, this evening.
Thank you. Friends, it's my privilege and pleasure to follow on from Jeremy. Unfortunately, he actually couldn't be with us this evening. He would have liked to have been here. He's actually addressing a similar meeting on Palestine, which is still having to face, like many other countries, but more acutely having to face the onslaught of imperialism and the divisions of colonialism and the oppression that still continues in that country that is struggling for statehood, struggling to survive, struggling just for humanity's sake itself, to feed itself, provide water and medicine. some things that we take for granted. So in a way, I'm not disappointed that Jeremy chose to address that particular function this evening rather than being with us. But nonetheless, I'm grateful for his video clip, which he wanted to share with everyone. And I'm delighted that Marx Memorial Library and Marion and team have put it in very, very quickly to ensure that we get to view that. Now, Liberation, with which he's also associated, as indeed is his wife as well as partner. Liberation, people of who've been involved in the struggles against colonialism would remember it as the movement for colonial freedom, as it was initially known, and has the status of having a consultative status at the United Nations. So it's a pretty powerful, pretty effective organization that doesn't always get the limelight, and people don't always know a great deal about it. For Liberation, the main thing to understand is that they start from a premise that that with the end of colonialism, imperialism is still pretty much active, even in the countries that are now independent, if you can understand independence from being colonial countries in the past, like India, which I'm sure other speakers will touch upon as to what's been happening there since this freedom. Today, the leaders of the remaining superpowers, like the USA, and indeed many other countries that would like to be superpowers or claim to be superpowers, are in a way exercising what imperialism has done brutally and nakedly before, but in a much more sophisticated. This is the problems with democracy.
Yeah.
That we allow people in to have a conversation, to listen.
Excuse me, I have a question.
You don't have a question. You know how to put a question in, so type it up. If you can't write or read well, then I don't really think you're really going to be wasting your time listening to us. This is for people who want to learn something. So I think this is the price we pay for democracy and tolerance. And that's what imperialism is trying to stop the world over. And if another classic example of that is what's been happening in Brazil. We've got a case of Luiz Lula da Silva coming up in the next few days, where Bolsonaro, prior to becoming president, put a charge sheet against Lula when he was president, investigated it, held a kangaroo court, decided that he was guilty, put him in prison, and took over as president.
I just shit myself. Please help me.
That is the sort of nonsense these people are not willing to listen to, because they don't want to hear the voice of freedom, the voice for democracy, the voice for change. They would much rather carry on with their fascistic tendencies, their fascistic attitude, and the imperialist viewpoints, that somehow they're superior. It is their viewpoints that people like George Floyd died of as a consequence of their views that were being reflected by the forces in the USA, that gave rise to Black Lives Matter, that gave rise to people like us questioning what is being going on in the world of imperialism, what happened in the world of colonialism, what happened in post-colonialism. It raises more questions for us to come together and discuss and examine as to what's been going on. The whole issue of slavery, the whole issue of indentured laborers that we very rarely talk about. But people have been moved right around the world against their will and are now partly here and all around the world, in the Caribbean and elsewhere. That's what they don't want to hear. And instead, they would much rather bombard meetings where people are trying to discuss issues with a serious mind, to come to some sort of conclusions, to say, what is it we need to be doing to address the wrongs of the past. And it is unfortunate that we have guests come from far away to be with us this evening, like we have Vijay Prashad, like we have Amarjite Singh, who are here this late hour to discuss with us and to share their views about different issues that affect us here. And I feel quite gutted that actually it's because I also belong to Marx Memorial Library as well as Liberation. And this is the first time I'm seeing a bunch of people come in and do what they have tried to do today. I'm sure it won't be the last, because in this new world and the norm that we're now operating under Zoom, under different virtual media, to highlight the wrongs of imperialism, to talk about the injustices that have taken place, and to bring that to the notice of the public that they will do more of this as time goes on. And so I'm not surprised that they're doing this, but rather disappointed that as human beings, we are not tolerant enough to listen to a different viewpoint with which we may agree or disagree, but are intolerant to even listen, would much rather go in and bombard and to cause the massive disturbance to a meeting rather than allow a voice to be heard. So my apologies to our guests, especially from India this evening, that he's had to experience something like this. This is something really, really new for us. But we are hearing that there's more of this taking place, this ridiculous, childish behavior that shows the culture of imperialism that we have to try to bring about change in. To actually, I mean, it's been a great example of the sort of things we got to tackle, the sort of things we've got to work against. The whole lecture this evening is about anti-imperialism and the Anti-Imperialist Week and education. And what a great example to say we need education, don't we? Do we need education? We need to educate ourselves from the beginning on our culture and our behaviors of what is right and what is simply wrong. So when Trump talked about his, what is the proud people or pride people? What did he call himself? In the USA. And saying it was okay, just switch off for a while and step back. That it's okay for people to do this. Well, it's not okay for people to do this. The progressive movement, and Marx Memorial Library is a classic example of that. It set up in 1933 when they were burning the books in Berlin that were progressive and Marxist. That is a living symbol that typifies the struggle, that illustrates the struggle of humanity to struggle against imperialism, against fascism in all its forms. I'm here to listen to our guest speakers. I don't intend to make a long speech, so I'll leave it there, and certainly am happy to answer any questions at the end that people may want to put into the chat box, which our team will look at, and I'm sure we can come back to anything. But I do want to listen to our guests this evening, and I'm pleased, which again, not everybody may agree or disagree with Jeremy Corbyn, but I'm pleased he took the time out and effort to provide us with the statement this evening, and will, I'm sure, in future meetings, be here live to talk with us, have a conversation with us, and listen to us, as indeed is the Vice President of the Marx Memorial Library, John McDonnell. So I'm pleased that these people of the left who were acting for the many against the few are still around, still active, and working in partnership with MML and with Liberation, and with my core organization that I come from, which is the Indian Workers Association. I thank you.
Okay. Harsiv, thank you very, very much indeed, and many appreciations for handling that interruption so brilliantly and actually turning it into a learning point for us. So many thanks for that. I'm delighted now to introduce Vijay Prashad from Tricontinental. He is the chief editor of Left Foot Books, which of course is highly relevant to this discussion on education. So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce you, Vijay. Over to you. Are you unmuted, Vijay?
Now I am. Okay.
Okay, great.
I'm very glad that you introduced me as the chief editor of Leftward, because tomorrow is the anniversary of the assassination of Che Guevara in Bolivia, the 9th of October, and 20 left publishers from India, about 9 of them in India, and then from Brazil, from Argentina, from Venezuela will be releasing this book, which is called Che, and it's a free e-downloadable book in 20 languages, 20 left publishers on the same day. So please look for that. You can find it at leftward.com. You can find it at the Tricontinental. It's part of Anti-Imperialist Week. I very much urge people to look at it, because this luminous person, Che Guevara, put down the marker for us on what an anti-imperialist life should be like. And the book has an introduction by Professor Ejaz Ahmed, which is really quite stunning. And it's an original text. I highly recommend it. It's free and it's downloadable. I'll make some remarks about imperialism and amnesia, the forgetting of imperialism, even in our time as it's happening. The coup against our brother comrade Evo Morales. The coup is happening in real time, and people say it's not a coup. It's about elections and so on. Amnesia is not only about the past, it's about things that are happening, you know, right in front of our eyes. Theft of wealth happening right in front of our eyes. The intervention of the French into Mali, intervention into Mozambique, the northern part of Mozambique, Cabo Delgado, it's happening right in front of our eyes. And we say, well, it's something else. It's humanitarian, you know. The Americans bombing another country, oh, it's humanitarian. Curious how amnesia is not only about the past, but it does help. If you can forget the past, you don't know how to understand the present. Remembering the past, like for instance, learning about Jallianwala Bagh teaches you something about the essence of imperialism and might help you not to have amnesia about the present. So this forgetting about the past is not just for history books. It has implications for the politics of today, because people don't learn how to see, how to detect how power is mobilized today. This is not just a question of the history books. It's a question about the politics today. You know, when the British, when the Europeans arrived in India, it's not like we were perfect people. You know, we've never claimed that. We were wretched people. I mean, we had things like caste and all kinds of patriarchies and religious intolerance. We were as wretched as any other people. Nobody said that we were perfect. The British came and then they ruined everything. And no historian of the salt is going to claim that. We're not saying we're perfect. I just want to repeat this in case people have misunderstood this criticism of British colonialism. But we had our own history that we were making. You know, we would have unraveled through our own struggles, very deep struggles, anti-caste struggles, struggles against patriarchy, struggles against intolerance of various kinds, and class struggles. These were already happening during the Mughal Empire. Brits showed up. They spent a long period, you know, as the dominion holders of this whole Southern Asian subcontinent. In a way, they also trapped our history, but I'm not getting too much into that, but I'll say something about that in a minute. The most important, significant thing they did was they made us more and more backward. I use that term very precisely because the structure of economy and politics that the British produced in India was such, the kind of structure they produced meant that they leached our wealth that we produced, that our ancestors produced. They leached that wealth out of our territory and took it to England. They took our wealth and invested it in England, so that we didn't have the wealth to invest in our own healthcare, in our own education, in our own industries, in our own human advancement, however we would have done it, you know, whether it's sloppily or well, that's irrelevant. The fact is, as Professor Utsa Patnaik calculated, from 1765 till 1938, she calculates from 1765 to 1938, 45 trillion US dollars was leached out of India and brought to this tiny little island. This tiny little island. England, Scotland, not sure if Wales and Ireland benefited that much from colonialism, but certainly England did, that even smaller region, and then to some extent Scotland, Dundee and these towns made a killing of the jute trade in Bengal. $45 trillion from 1765 to 1938 was leached out of India, which means Indians had less capital to produce for our own social development, and this was an enormous down payment for the advancement of the English people. Now, I want you to understand something, that last year, the gross domestic product of the United Kingdom was $2 trillion. Last year, the gross domestic product was $2 trillion. So $45 trillion was taken out of India and brought to England. I want to give you another sense of what these numbers mean. I'm not sure, when one goes to buy a house or start a business, you're asked to make a down payment. Typically, banks want you to bring 10 to 15% of the loan you're taking and put down on the property that you're buying or that you're leasing or whatever. They want you to put some kind of down payment. It's generally in the 10 to 15% range. We have calculated that in Manchester, 30% of the down payment for Manchester's industry, 30% mind you, came from India. 30%. So British or English capitalism was financed by the drain of wealth from India. It was financed by the trade, the most disgusting trade in human beings, largely from Africa, traded into the Caribbean and the Americas. It was financed by the sugarcane trade and the rum trade in the Caribbean. I mean, that's what finances British industry, not the domestic savings of the British people. So the growth of Britain, the advancement of Britain happened in a way at the same time as the forced backwardness of our parts of the world. When the British left, finally, when they were booted out of India in 1947, the literacy rate was about 13%. And you see, now people will say, well, we brought you education, we brought you this, we brought you that. 13% was the literacy rate. You should be ashamed of yourselves. After 200 years, you were only able to have a literacy rate of 13% because you didn't produce schools for us at all. And we had schools beforehand. We were wretched, certainly beforehand as well, but we had schools. We had a much higher literacy rate. So I want us to consider what this theft of wealth means. What it means is less money to produce human development in a place like India. That's the first point I want to make. Linked to that, because we had lower literacy rates, our health was poorer. When the so-called Spanish flu hit, which was not a Spanish flu, it actually begins in Kansas in the United States. It's called the Spanish flu because Spain was not a belligerent in World War I. There was no censorship in the Spanish media. And so it was reported that there was a flu. That's why it's called the Spanish flu. It doesn't start in Spain. But that Spanish flu, the total mortality from that Spanish flu, 60% took place in India. 60% of the total death from that happened in India. Our healthcare systems are abysmal to none. Healthcare none, education none. This produced backwardness, and then we were blamed for our own backwardness. This is how imperial ideology works. Rather than say the reason you have ill health is because we're taking all this wealth to Manchester, to Birmingham, to London, to Dundee and so on, rather than say that directly, cleanly, you say, no, we have come here to civilize you, but you're too backward to be civilized. And that's really how racism gets structured into modern capitalism, because they deceitfully said that your backwardness is cultural and has nothing to do with the drain of wealth. And that's how they bake racism into capitalism. Racism is not antithetical to capitalism, it's baked into it. I'm just going to make one last point, and then, Amarjit, I'm going to turn it to you. But the last point I want to make, imperialism continues till today in a very material sense. And I don't have time to get into this, and most of you will be bored by economics anyway. But let me just put it to you quite plainly. Currently, the external debt of developing countries, most of these countries were former colonies. The current external debt of developing countries is $11 trillion currently. Most of these countries say that they are paying over 50% of their GDP as debt servicing. In other words, because they continue to pay wealthy bondholders in Europe and the United States to finance this 11 trillion debt, they can't hire more healthcare people. They can't fight the pandemic. They can't fight illiteracy. They can't hire teachers. Basic services cannot be provided in our countries because we are paying off wealthy bondholders, because there's never been reparations. In the Indian case, for that 45 trillion that was siphoned out of India, 11 trillion is the external debt. During this pandemic, developing countries asked the Paris and London Club, these are the creditors, private and public creditors in Europe, said, can we have debt suspension, suspend the payments, or debt cancellation, or some sort of haircut, something in between? They refused. The US Treasury Department cautioned the Paris and London Club not to accept any final settlement on debt. You continue to pay debt, they say. Now, look, it's not on the agenda to get reparations, frankly. Not interested in charity from England. When India ran into a balance of payments problem in 1991 in July, India had to airlift, I've forgotten the exact number, but some tons of gold to the Bank of London before they got a paper loan from the Bank of London. That was the beginning of our liberalization process. We had to actually airlift gold to London. There was no promissory note, nothing. They wanted the gold to come there. Imagine that imperialist attitude. Nobody's saying let's have reparations today, frankly. And I wouldn't want it, because it would come dripping with sanctimonious racism. We don't want their reparations. What we want is the total cancellation of debt. Total cancellation of debt, and we want the transfer of certain technologies. We want, for instance, all pharmaceutical technologies to be in the public domain. We don't want this vaccine for COVID-19 to be a commodity. Put it up on the web. We will create our own pharmaceutical mechanisms to produce the vaccine. Anyway, it has to be refrigerated, and courier companies say they don't have the means to transport millions of doses by courier, refrigerated and so on. We don't want reparations. We want total debt cancellation, and we want the end of intellectual property rules. Just two fundamental demands. You want to talk about anti-imperialism, you want to talk about how you've gone beyond that, put these things on the table. Nobody's asking these governments to look at other people around the world and treat other people with dignity. You know what? We don't want you to treat us with dignity because you're forced to treat us with dignity. We are dignified people already. We don't need your opinion to make us feel dignified. I don't care what Boris Johnson says about me. I have no interest. I don't look for his approval. I am already dignified. It's Boris, if any ruler or any person is a racist in any country, their racism is a corrosion of their own soul. I don't want to heal them from racism. They are entitled and welcome to their racism. They can be racist forever. We are dignified people. We don't need them to give us benediction. Finally, when we talk about anti-imperialism in education, I think the main issue here is, and I'm just repeating what I started with, that this issue of educating people about the past, why do we insist on the truth of Jallianwala Bagh, for instance, to be in history books? We insist on it only because of the martyrs of Jallianwala Bagh, and not only Jallianwala Bagh, all the other massacres in South Asia and the Caribbean, in Africa, what the Belgians did in the Congo. We want it for the martyrs, that their deaths are in our history books, yes, but we also want it for today. So your attitude of imperialism is tempered by your understanding of history. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Vijay. That's absolutely inspiring. And it takes us right on to Amarjite Singh's contribution. Welcome, Amarjite, who is president of the Jallianwala Bagh campaign committee. So a very warm welcome to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Marge. Firstly, I'd like to put on record thanking the Marx Memorial Library for inviting us a slot on this important meeting, an event. And the Indian Workers Association, I think, must be thanked for the work that they've done to create the organization of the apology for the Jallianwala Bagh campaign. I think it's important we put that on record, and they've been campaigning for many years. It's not just up to running of the centenary. And that campaign still goes on. And I think for me, it's trying to link in what Harsiv has said and what Vijay has said. And where the Jallianwala Bagh massacre campaign comes from is it's a burning issue for a person of my age who was born and bred in Wales, went to India for my first time when I was 21, went to Amritsar, the Golden Temple, and then my parents, my mother telling me that, you know, there's a bag next door, do you want to go and have a look at it? And then realizing what that was all about. And I think it's not only my story, I think it's a story of many of my generation that don't understand. And I think even my children, my grandchildren, my granddaughters are 11 years of age. You know, it's only when you speak about it, they understand it. And I think with the Jallianwala Bagh, you know, this was on the 30th of April, 1919, where, you know, people of all ages gathered because the British Empire had lost many people in the First World War fighting on the borders of Europe, and they wanted to recruit more and more soldiers and people for that. And I think people got to understand this was a friendly demonstration to get together and you know, speak about what was happening. And you know, unarmed people were shot upon by the order of Michael O'Dwyer and General Dyer going in with his guns. And I think that's just a part of the history. And I think, you know, if people want to look into the campaign further, you know, there are links on a website. But I think where the campaign comes from, where the campaign wants to go, I think, you know, the campaign has picked up momentum over the years. And I'll make this clear. And people will say, well, the centenary is gone. But as we say, the centenary is behind us, but it's never too late to apologize. And I think that's going to be our motto going on. And I think, you know, the campaign has gathered momentum. We had a public petition, and this petition was signed from all walks of life in the United Kingdom. You know, it wasn't just the South Asian community. This is trade unions, trade unionists, community people, and as well as political cross-party MPs, SMPs, AMs that have signed the EDM as well. You know, we've had meetings in mosques, in gurdwaras, in mandirs, you know, where we've actually gone out and actually communicated with the communities of the campaign. We've had public meetings all over the country, Birmingham, Manchester, Bradford, up and down the country. And And on the 100th year, we had a very good general meeting in London that was well attended from all walks of life again. And those people, you know, those people who turned up were people who actually lost family in the Jalaliya Bagh as well. So, you know, we have been creating momentum. I think we've done, you know, really well. You know, we've had fringe meetings at TUC Congress. We've had stalls outside union events to sign petitions and, you know, the profile of the campaign. We've had a debate in the House of Lords, you know, where we've had Lord Desai move it, and that was back 2019, so it wasn't that far ago. And we had a discussion in, you know, in Parliament running up to the 100 years. And I'll be honest with you, we were disappointed how far Theresa May actually went with what she said. She didn't go nowhere near an apology. You know, regret, we all regret things, but it's not an apology, and that's what I think people have to understand. And, you know, in the same breath, you know, David Cameron did the same thing, you know, when he visited the Jalaliya Bagh. And I think going on for that, you know, UK governments have apologized for atrocities in the past, for the slave trade, for Bloody Sunday. So it's not if they can't apologize, don't want to apologize. And I will go back to something Vijay said, you know, it's about, you know, we don't want reparation. You know, if it's about talk about reparation, we'll accept £1. You know, it's the meaning for that I think is more important of what I say. Now, you know, if Jeremy Corbyn was the Prime Minister of this country, I can guarantee he would have given an apology, and he would have us actually having a look at the curriculum in schools and, you know, colonial history. And, you know, he went so far that he actually put it into the manifesto of the Labour Party. And that manifesto and the what he agreed to still stands in a manifesto. My understanding is Keir Starmer has acknowledged that he stands by that at the present moment. I don't, you know, we can't guarantee it. However, why is an apology important? And it is what, you know, Vijay said as well earlier on, but I think it gives resolve and closure to what happened in the Jalaliya Bagh, especially those who had loved ones, you know, and these loved ones don't just live in India or the United Kingdom, they live in Canada and further afield. And I think people will understand it's not us, you know, in the United Kingdom running this campaign. You know, there are other organizations around the world that are running similar, where they got, you know, people who had loved ones in that massacre. And I think, you know, going on to why this links in with the, you know, the memorial, the Marx Memorial Library Lecture Week. And I think it's important for our campaign. I think it's important that we go further now, because we've had over 7 months of lockdown where, really speaking, we haven't been able to take the campaign further. But we've started to have Zoom meetings where we're organizing and we're waiting for the lockdown to ease up so we can take our campaign further afield. And recently we had a Zoom meeting like this with the NEU, one of the largest education providers in this country. And that trade union has been on board, and we had a very successful Zoom meeting. And we had actually Dr. Shastri Tharoor, who actually sent a message from India on that. And, you know, people who don't know who Shastri Tharoor, right? He's a former Minister of State in India, as well as Under Secretary General of United Nations. So, you know, it just shows you, as I say, you know, there is interest further afield, not only what we're doing in the United Kingdom. And I think Black Lives Matter has regenerated the discussion around education and how we should be educated. And it's going back to what Jeremy said, you know, it's about understanding the past. Because if you talk to my children, you know, they don't see themselves as Indians. I'll be honest with you, Vijay, they don't. You know, they think they are British, right? But I think that goes with it. With that is they forget about their history and their past. And if they forget about their history and their past, right, we forget about the horrific the deeds done by the British Empire for the name of the British Empire. So what we're doing now for the future as a campaign, as I say, we're looking at organising a live event similar to this on the Jalalira Bagh. We're looking at connecting ourselves with the political cross-party people who are on board and those who have been elected newly. We're looking at working with trade unions. We want to go back into the communities to connect with the communities again. We're looking at introducing another EDM. And I think I think the most important thing is that we roll this and we connect with the younger generation to make sure that they don't forget what their history is, because it is part of their history. They live in this country, they get educated in this country. Somebody who comes from the valleys in West Wales, in a little town called Llanelli, they're not going to teach you about Britain history. They're not going to tell, they might tell you about Queen Victoria or Henry VIII, but they're not going to tell you the atrocities they did, not only in India, as Jeremy has said, but wider afield. So I think it's important. It's something for you to think about in the long term, but how far can we take this campaign? And as trade unions, we always say, if you stand together, you will win. If you stand alone, you'll be forgotten. So that's my contribution.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And that flags up so sharply and starkly what we all need to understand about empire and how we need to educate ourselves and educate the next generation. So that's absolutely great. We've now got time for questions and discussion. I've got a couple I've been passed to me from the chat already. So I'm going to read those out and then invite the speakers to comment. But in the meantime, please do put your questions and your comments in the chat. This is your chance to engage with the speakers, okay? So I'll read out the first question, which very much relates to what you've just been saying. How many people and leaders of the liberation movement have been murdered by imperialist countries? So I don't know, it might be difficult to put numbers, but I think that raises a lot of questions, doesn't it? I don't know who'd like to have a go at that first. I don't know. Vijay, would you like to have a go at that one?
I thought Harsiv was going to speak.
I can.
Please go ahead.
Okay. I mean, it's a very interesting question. How do you begin to put a number on how many people have been killed in the struggle against or for liberation? And where does one begin? I mean, it's centuries old, the struggle for freedom. And I would only be guessing, and I don't think anybody's ever I've never seen a written final figure, but it runs into millions. If millions died as, for freedom and the famine in Bengal, if millions died in the indigenous populations of America, how many died? I understand when America was being colonized, they actually caused a mini ice age of the number of indigenous people that were killed. How many were killed in the Caribbean when people were taken there? Some from India, as well, the indentured laborers, but more importantly, the slaves and everybody when they went to start removing the indigenous people there, or in Latin America, or in Africa. Millions. Probably more died as a consequence than probably we lost in the world wars. It's a huge figure. But I think Vijay probably got far more detail than I could possibly have. But mine is just on my reading of what's gone on in this world. And you got still our close country here, Ireland, still occupied in 6 of its counties. So it's still carrying on. In Palestine, I just mentioned at the beginning. How many people are still dying there today?
Yeah, thanks. Good point, Harsiv. Yeah, Vijay, did you want to come in here?
I mean, the question is of also of leaders on the other side. And I mean, I'm a stuck record on this. I just want to say that you don't even need to kill people any longer. How, again, take the case of Evo Morales. I mean, you just disappear him from political life, and then you just persecute his political party, and there's no election in Bolivia for a full year, and nobody complains, because this is how democracy is supposed to work today. Whatever the imperialist countries, however they dictate the terms, so shall it be reported in the press. And this includes the Guardian, at one point a fairly decent newspaper of the left social democratic liberal persuasion, now often blows the trumpet for imperialism. I don't see any difference, I'm afraid. Appalling coverage on Bolivia, appalling. Our brother Evo Morales being ripped out of the country. Where were the sentinels of the press demanding that, look, his term doesn't end until January? The term for the previous election doesn't end till January. Let him serve his term out. Why was he removed from the country in November? Gutless media just replicating what the Home Office and Foreign Office, basically they send them faxes, and these faxes are printed as news. Yeah, it's gutless.
Yeah, thank you. Amarjite, did you want to come back on this one? Amarjite? Sorry. Okay, well, obviously you can have a chance to come back later, but I've got quite a long question. Oh, sorry.
I think Vijay and Harsiv's covered it, I think.
Okay, right. Well, I now have quite a complicated question, which is for Vijay specifically, but it could be for others. If India or any other country formerly colonized by Britain were to nationalize a British company without compensation, how do you think the British state would respond? And also, how would the TUC in Britain respond? And then there's a further bit to the question. When the Spanish oil company Repsol was only partially nationalized and with compensation in Argentina a few years ago, the dominant social democratic trade unions in Spain opposed the nationalization. When Iran nationalized the Anglo-Persian Oil Company in 1951, some of the harshest militarist reaction from Britain came from, sadly, the Labour Party. Do you see that Europe's social democratic parties and trade unions have any desire or ability to confront their own imperialist past? Well, it's a question for you, but I'm sure the others will have comments too.
Well, I'll definitely turn to them for the comment on the TUC and the Labour Party, because I'm not rude enough to, I can criticize the Guardian, but I don't want to say anything about the Labour Party and the TUC. That would be a rudeness of a guest. I just published this book called Washington Bullets, A History of the CIA Coups and Assassinations. And the reason I'm sharing it is it's appropriate to the question. Let's leave out the examples that have come of Argentina, Spain. Let's just go to the heart of the question, the Cuban Revolution. When the Cuban Revolution took place and the young revolutionaries came into Havana in early 1959, they turned to look around in their country. They had already studied the matter. And they said, our people in Cuba pay higher electricity rates to an American multinational firm than people do in the United States. So we're going to revise the rates for the electricity bills. Then they also said, we don't think we're getting a good deal selling sugarcane through the American companies to the United States market. We're going to revise all of this. Initially, there was no expropriation. They first started by saying, we're just going to revise the rates. Those companies then complained to the US government and the blockade begins. It's at that point that they did expropriate the companies, and they said, this is what Castro said. He said, we're taking this company, but we're not taking it without compensation. The compensation is all the theft that you have sitting in your bank account in the United States. So we are just covering our bill here, and we're taking this. And Cuba has suffered 60 plus years of a blockade because they did something which is quite elementary. They said that, you know, we are resource socialists. Our resources are for our people. They are not for you. They're not to be leached like England leached India for over 200 years. Our resources for our people. When Hugo Chavez comes to power in Venezuela, he puts in place resource socialism. This is absolutely forbidden by the rules of imperialism. And till today, you saw the Bank of London holding 31 tons of Venezuelan gold inside its vault. The Venezuelan government had to come to London, fight a court case, and recently the England and Wales Court of Appeal has recently said that no, the Venezuelans have a point here, and what amounts to almost $1.8 billion should be turned over if we study it more, and they've sent the case back to a lower court. So, you know, what is the reaction of governments when elementary things like we want to handle the pricing of our own resources? What do? They go to war against you. In the case of Venezuela, they've gone to a hybrid war. In the case of Cuba, it's a long-term, you know, 60, 70-year hybrid war. I mean, listen, people, this is what they do. You know, these are the facts. I'm not interpreting anything. You offer me a more coherent interpretation of what is happening to Cuba. You offer me a more coherent interpretation of what is happening to Venezuela, and I might accept it. But the only reasonable, rational analysis based on the facts is that these countries had to be suffocated because they were resource socialist countries. They precisely said that we are going to take, you know, our resources and we're going to mobilize them in ways that benefit our people, not your people, but our people. This is why Morales was overthrown. This is why Thomas Sankara was overthrown in Burkina Faso in 1987. Go back to this is why Lumumba was killed in 1961 in the Congo. I mean, do I need to go on? I mean, there's a pattern here. Anytime anybody came and said, we want to use our resources for our own people, they were killed. Why were they killed? Why?
I think, yeah, that says so much. Thank you, Vijay. Would either Harsiv or Amarjite like to add any comments here?
Just a quick comment, if I may, Chair. Just on whether the Labour Party or the TUC, what was the question? I'm just trying to read it, but would be have the desire or ability to confront their own imperialist past?
Yeah.
Very, very interesting question, and obviously one at least to all sorts of interpretation, because I'm just reminded the fact that we are talking about anti-imperialism and education, and are only talking about it just a few days ago. And one of our dear comrades, Professor Mary Davis, she was replying to something similar along these lines. And when we're demanding for education, the teaching of British colonial history as part of a curriculum, and saying, look, this history of Britain and the British Empire needs to be taught. She said, you know, would you actually have any confidence in the system, or the British system, the imperial system, whatever you want to call it, of actually teaching and confronting and teaching this faithfully in schools that they should be taught? That in the end, it's left to us, to people like us, people like the Marx Memorial Library, people like the IWA, people like Liberation, people like this. There are some progressive trade unions, so well, not all trade unions. That would be extremely unfair. And there are some good Labour Party people too. But to rely on them to confront their imperialist past is probably pushing it a little bit too far. At this moment in time, just to acknowledge that things have gone wrong and terribly wrong, done in our name of the working class, British working class, of which I am a part, that it was done in our name would be a good starting point. And just to touch upon Vijay's point, that is very real. A real problem for the Cubans right now is that under Trump, who's trying to undo everything that Obama had, and he hadn't done a great deal, by the way, in normalizing relations with Cuba. He's gone ahead and done everything to unravel even that. And they are trying to sue through American courts and also through European courts now, Cuba, for anything that they had nationalized, including things like the airport. And they want all the lending charges that have been accrued in the 50, 60 years to be paid to the Americans, and including some of the firms, etc. So, you know, the tobacco companies who can't make anything back in USA anymore, but they still want to pursue their claims through courts. And this is a real problem. Whether I think in Africa, in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, some of these old companies are going back, trying to reclaim and get compensation. So there is a real genuine problem, and I think Vijay is right on, and I'm look forward to reading his book as to see what it says in there. So it's a little plug for his book, but I think obviously we need to learn more and read more, because it is a real genuine problem. And internationally, we need to extend solidarity from functions like this, from organizations like this, to stand with the people of Cuba, stand with the people who stood up to imperialism and are standing up to imperialism, and need to stand shoulder to shoulder with them and say, you know, we will not be compensating, we will not be paying back what belonged to us in the first place. And something else, by the way, somebody, and we mentioned Shashi Tharoor, I was reading one of his books, something, you know, that British Empire looted, and we call it British, I don't know whether we should call it English Empire, well, something that looted was the word loot itself. You know, that's what so even the language was looted. So what can we say?
Oh, thank you, Harsiv. Thanks. Amarjite, would you like to add anything at this point? Okay, the next. Sorry.
I was unmuted. Yeah, I just thought I'd like to say, because I think, you know, coming from a trade union sort of background, I think you can either have a diplomatic answer, or you can have a political answer. And I think for the diplomatic answer, it's around, if you look at the TUC in the United Kingdom, you know, it has changed over many years in its approach to international workers, and mainly in this country rather than international workers across the world. Let's be honest, you know, somebody like myself, I see somebody who works in India, a worker same as me, you know, or in Africa or anywhere like, but the TUC doesn't see it that way. They see their affiliates as their main bread and butter. And I think it's only recently, even when you had large unions such as Unite, when they had many workers in the tobacco industry, you know, and we wanted to reduce smoking in this country, how the TUC more or less kept at arm's length to that discussion, that debate, and left it to the trade unions to sort of debate amongst themselves. So, you know, if you talk about the TUC itself, the TUC has many affiliates. I think it's 50-something affiliates at the present moment. And I think it's, how can you say, it's ruled by the affiliates rather than a standalone organization, if I can see what I mean. So that's my diplomatic sort of answer to it.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay. Please do put your questions in the chat, by the way, and your comments. But I've got another one here which leads on from the previous discussion about education. Do the panel have examples of people or organizations developing educational materials and courses that do confront imperialism, past and present, properly? Okay, so I don't know who'd like to start with that.
Gosh, do we know if any courses? I would suggest that people go onto the Marx Memorial Library website. Is that very good. What? Come on, there's so many courses, and I certainly hope we'll be putting them on the chat line for people to get involved in and sign up. And they can do this from anywhere in the world and join those courses. And I highly recommend them. That from basic Marxism to learning historical materialism, and you name it, the courses are there. And they do attract a lot of people to get involved. And also the website of Marx Memorial Library, which I'm hoping that, I won't steal her thunder, I'm hoping Mariam will come back at the end and talk about things like that.
Yeah.
Courses, yeah, absolutely. Look, there's courses run, I think trade unions do run good courses as well. But if you really want some good working class courses, then you can't go far wrong than the MML. And I'm sure in India, they got similar structures, which perhaps Vijay can touch upon.
Okay, thanks, Harsiv. Mariam certainly will be coming into the discussion in a bit to talk about the library. Sorry, yes.
Can I come in on that? And I think it's important. You know, somebody who went to school up to the age of 15 in this country came back with, you know, left school with a couple of GCSEs. And I'll be honest with you, most of my education came from the trade union movement. And I notice Steve Bell is on this event as well. And he was the branch secretary that actually, when he actually introduced me to becoming a rep, I said to him, well, I haven't got the knowledge or the experience. And he said to me, don't worry, the trade union will give you that, you know, the knowledge. And when he became the policy advisor to our general secretary, Billy Hayes, you know, Steve did introduce a lot of education in the CW on global history, you know, where you could actually put in for a degree or a diploma, a degree into industrial and political labor training. And, you know, I got as far as a diploma in employment law because of the work I do. So there are some good trade unions out there that provide, I'm not saying that education is still there, but it gave me a platform. You know, the trade union gave me a platform to go and seek more education about the global history of this world rather than just, you know, United Kingdom, what happened in the United Kingdom. So, you know, I think there are some good unions out there. But as Harsiv said, you know, then they're very limited.
Okay, thank you very much. That's helpful. Did you want to come in at this point, Vijay, or should we move on to the next question?
Well, I just would like to say that it's not for lack of material or books to read. I'll give you just one example. In the 1950s, Eric Williams wrote a PhD which was published as Capitalism and Slavery. Eric Williams then becomes the first Prime Minister of Jamaica, of independent Jamaica. Just go and read Eric Williams' book. You know, that book lays out the fundamental relationship between capitalism and human enslavement. There's enough material and reading material available for the crimes of imperialism. The question is, it's not been lifted up into the human imagination as an important story to tell. We've done all the research. It's there over the last 100 and some years. Dadabhai Naoroji was writing about the drain of wealth in the 19th century while it was happening. But what he was writing about wasn't lifted up into the human imagination. Marx wrote so searingly against imperialism and colonialism, including against what was being done to Ireland. It was never lifted up and given its place in the human imagination. I think that's what we're really saying. We're not saying let's go and write the books or, you know, let's even have the classes necessarily. Let's lift this up into the human imagination.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, the next question is from somebody from Finland, and it says, I'm from Finland, and even some of our leftist party members and intellectuals say that they think that imperialism doesn't actually exist anymore. What would you like to reply to them? That's a very interesting question. Do you want to carry on, Vijay, and then let the others
actually, this is something very close to my work and thinking. At Leftward, we just published a book edited by Emiliano Lopez called "The Veins of the South Are Still Open," and it's an excellent collection of some of the best contemporary writing on imperialism by Prabhat and Utsa Patnaik, by John Smith, terrific scholar, British scholar, by Ahmed Tonak, by Attilio Boron, Gabriel Marino, and so on. It's a superb collection. Here's the issue that they put firmly on the table. What they argue is that for a very long period and into today, a large section of particularly a tropical belt of countries has had their purchasing power suppressed, their basic intake of nutrition suppressed, so that raw material prices can remain low. Whether this is in the Congo, where cobalt and copper are taken out, leached out it could be the copper belt region of Zambia, where people who remove the copper from the soil don't have access to education. Their children can't study in schools. They walk on top of this immense, wealthy and important, mineral for the world we live in. So what the argument is, this suppression of wages, the keeping of the standard of living down for, hundreds of millions, if not billions of people in this belt, to bring commodity prices, keep them down. What this enables is vast profits to be made in the core countries of imperialism in the Atlantic zone. Well, this is the structure that still exists. And again, any time in any part of this belt of tropical countries, anytime you see a government trying to assert the rights of the people, that's when you see the coup d'etat, that's when you see the assassination, that's when you see the dirty tricks. I mean, for me, for my generation, the greatest missed opportunity was what happened to Burkina Faso. Because here in 1983, you saw a government come in led by Thomas Sankara. They changed the name of the country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, which means land of upright people. They pushed an agenda of land reform, of artisanal development through cooperatives. They insisted on having a position against patriarchy and putting that into the policies of the government and so on. And then who comes along but French intelligence and others, and he is killed in 1987, the 5th of May. Now you tell me there is no imperialism today.
Okay, Vijay, thank you. And I was just wondering if it might be possible for the publications that you've referred to, if perhaps we could have details of those so that they could go up on the website afterwards, so that everybody can share those. Thank you. Would Harsiv or Amarjite like to comment on this one too?
I think, quite honestly, Vijay has given a very comprehensive answer on that. It's that statement is like some of the statements we hear in this country about, well, institutional racism doesn't really exist, racism doesn't exist, or we hear from people like in the Americas that class doesn't exist, or in India who might say caste doesn't exist. But the reality is very much there. And as people's perceptions are being changed or muddied or fogged or just being hidden from the reality, then we've got a job of work to do. But obviously it's for friends in Finland, I'd say, look, just look around you. What's happening in the world, and Vijay's mentioned several instances of Latin America. What's going on? America, the US America still sees Latin America as its backyard. Doesn't particularly even like Canada doing what it wants to do. Doesn't want Europe to act independently in any way, and sees Middle East and the some of those countries there is basically its oil wells, is envious of China and getting into all sorts of issues with China and what China is doing, and that can be questioned too. So it goes on and on, what's happening in Africa and you name it. Just got to see it. Just because somebody says something doesn't exist. It's like Trump saying, look, climate change. Any threat to the climate doesn't exist. By him saying so, it doesn't get rid of it. Still very much there. So simply saying something's fake news doesn't make it go away. Imperialism very much there in all different shapes and forms. And we need to recognize that and try and talk about that as often as we can.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I'm just looking at my watch. If the speakers again have a chance to come back on anything before the end, I think I'd like at this point to invite Miriam to say something about the library, Miriam, and about the education programme.
Thank you, Marge. Well, I'm just first going to echo what a lot of people have been saying in the chat. Say a massive, massive thank you to our panelists. I think it's been a really fascinating and important discussion, hopefully the beginning of many, many more. Without kind of repeating what's already been said, obviously Amarjite and Jeremy really highlighted the importance of education, of understanding how we've got to where we are, to disentangle where we go from here, basically. The Marx Memorial Library, as I'm sure many of you know, was founded as a workers' school in 1933. You only have to look into our archives to find syllabuses on the crimes of imperialism, of British imperialism, written by our tutors, aimed at British workers in the 1930s and 40s. So that work's been going on for a while, but obviously the context has changed, and it's important work. And as Vijay, as has been highlighted just now about the question about imperialism today, we need to be able to identify its current manifestations and also its legacies in terms of racist ideologies in particular. I think that's really, really important for today, because people can kind of spot these symptoms, but often not diagnose where they've come from. And obviously, as Harsiv's mentioned as well, the library is incredibly well placed to do this. Not only do we have this proud history behind us, but also our beautiful 3-story historic building is crammed full of these documentary traces and of this history that we can uncover. And we just started a process in the last few weeks, actually, and Harsiv's been involved with this, as well as 2 of our volunteers, Adam and Latoya, so massive thank you to them, starting to look through some of our documents on struggle for colonial liberation and Indian communist movements as well. And we've just, although, as you can imagine, the current circumstances mean we've had very limited time on site in the last few months, but we have managed to digitize some, like a very small sample really of some of this material. And I'm new to this subject as well, and I'm learning all the time, and this is at the beginning of a process. So we've put up some of this material online, really as a kind of holding page. I've just put the link in the chat, and we want this to be the beginning of a process of uncovering this really important part of our collection. You know, a lot of people know us for the Spanish Civil War, for the peace movement, but we need to really pull this part of our library and archive out and really mobilise it in this important education work we've all been talking about this evening. I won't go on for much longer, but just to also say, despite the irritating interruptions of earlier, these new digital platforms have served us very, very well in the last few months. And, you know, it's wonderful to see people from all around the world here this evening, and that really gives us another avenue to pursue some of this work, as well as the ones we've been doing more recently anyway, with things like school groups and things like this. So I think that's enough for me, but just I'm really pleased this has happened, and it's the beginning of much more, I hope.
Okay, thank you very much, Mary. And of course, if you're not already a member, join the library. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, well, I think given the time now, it probably makes sense to just ask our speakers in reverse order if they'd like to add anything or make any further comments on the discussion. So maybe, Amarjite, if you'd like to go first, and then we'll take Vijay and then Harsiv.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's been really a good event. And I think, you know, I'd like to thank the Marx Memorial Library for the event again. And I think the key aspect of tonight, it is about education. And, you know, they say knowledge is power. And I think, as Harsiv have said earlier on, you know, there's a platform there for you to access that knowledge, but it's sometimes difficult to find your way to that platform. And I think it's getting the word out. And I think, you know, the Jalalian Bagh campaign, Master Camp campaign committee has grasped this about education, knowledge. And this is the reason we want to have that platform with the NEU and any other education providers, trade unions out there. And I think for us is to take this platform on education forward. And, you know, if we can get into a curriculum for colonial education and what the true value of the empire was to not only Indian people from the subcontinent, but Africa, even as far as Australia, what happened to the Aborigine, I think, you know, it will benefit this country more to understand its past so it can move forward, as Jeremy said. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay. Vijay.
Well, you know, I tend to look at the Marx Memorial Library as my London home, if you don't mind. I'm just saying that because I think it's very important for institutions of this kind to be supported fundamentally, you know, without question. Well, why should the Marx Memorial Library be supported? Because Lenin had an office there and he edited Iskra in that office. And Lenin was one of the great anti-imperialists of world history, because what Lenin does is he shows the social democratic movement, the Marxist movement, that if you don't take the anti-colonial movement centrally to your struggles inside Europe, if the European left doesn't understand that its great ally is not in the East, he says, but the East will lead the way. 1913, he writes, "Backward Europe, advanced Asia." Go back and read that article. Lenin was the great anti-imperialist. He understood it's the alliance of national liberation movements in the colonial part of the world with the socialist movement in the West, he said, which will advance human civilization forward. I mean, he was thinking all these things inside what is today the Marx Memorial Library. It gives me such pride, firstly, to join you on this platform, but also that you are now putting up on your website material from the Indian Communist movement about things like the Bengal famine, about things like the student struggle, about trade union struggles, strike wave, and so on. I mean, it's just incredible that you're doing this. One of the things that we've got to do is we've got to be a little more aggressive in telling our socialist history, our communist history, our contribution to Marxist theory. You know, we in the other parts of the world are not merely reflections of what happens, you know, in Europe or in the United States. We make our own history, and we need to be much more forthright in telling our history in our terms. So, you know, Marx Memorial Library, so great to have you in London, and so great to be with you.
Thank you so much, Vijay. Harsiv, would you like to add anything here at this point?
It's a bit difficult to add anything to after Vijay has said so many nice things about the library and the work that we do. And it's been my pleasure actually be able to talk about both of them. It's a representative of liberation that's very close to Marx Memorial Library, as a representative from the Cuba Solidarity Campaign. Somebody who worked with the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, with the Venezuela Solidarity Campaigns. And now we're having to set one up, Vijay. I'm sure you won't be surprised, an Indian Solidarity Campaign, because of the what could be possibly potentially happening there. Because I think they also will need some unified action and people to speak up, like we had to in 1975 when the emergency was there. So I think, look, we need solidarity with one another. We need solidarity across organizations, across like-minded people to come together on common platforms like this evening's and share our views. We may agree or disagree, but it's a democracy. It's a learning process. And we need to learn if we're going to combat imperialism and continue to combat imperialism, like Vijay said, that Lenin, and if you're following the concept of Lenin, and just to close with that, one other thing I remember quite clearly is theory and practice. That two go hand in hand. One cannot do without the other. To bring about change, to bring about revolution, to bring about anything that you want to do. So you need both. So it's a great reminder that the library is linked to Lenin and his legacy, and holds a lot of his stuff there. And people do come and visit from all over the world. And of course, nearby, if you're visiting London at all, we also have Highgate, where the grave of Karl Marx is. And again, the library is privileged to be a part of that, to look after that as well. And the people that came on this evening, they're the sort of people that go and try and desecrate that too. So we have to look after our institutions. We have to work together and continue on this journey of education to bring about awareness about where we've been in the past. And like Jeremy said, you know, to shape the future. Together we can do it. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, very warm thanks to all the speakers, and thanks to the audience and to everybody for your patience and for actually turning that interruption into a point for learning. So thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.